10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Game over.
Well, let's be honest. That game was a great big pile of shit. To borrow a reference from Jurassic Park. So I'm going to go straight to the guests here. We're going to welcome in Harman Dayal and Tony Ferrari, the Tony Ferrari, as his Twitter handle says. How's it going, guys?
Oh,
Pretty
it's
good.
good. Yeah, it's good. After that game, I'm almost glad it's over.
I'm very glad it's over. That was a huge waste of my night, to be honest with you all. You know what the best thing about that game was I was watching the first period with my oldest, and he copied my shirt and wanted to draw the logo for the show, but also drew, I don't know if you, no, too much bright light. There, there, maybe. He drew the little game guy and then a rainbow over top and some spring flowers over here.
Just
Is it
beautiful.
springtime? What's
Better
that?
art skills than me.
Yeah, seriously, better than me. He's getting pretty good. 4.5 years old. So that was the highlight of the game for me, frankly. It was not a very entertaining one. I will say, one guy that I was pretty impressed with tonight, like on and off, was Sam Montembeault, who's again been put in a tough situation. But weirdly, I think he stopped every single one of the best chances that the Blue Jackets had tonight and allowed 5 goals on like either bad bounces or just not that great of chances. It was a weird night for him.
Yeah, absolutely. I think especially early in the first half of the game, I just felt Columbus came out really strong and they were quick to pucks. I thought they were fast. I really think that they, despite, I don't know what the stats say after that kind of a game, but in terms of quality chances, I just felt like Columbus really came hard at the Canadiens early. And especially for the first half of the game, it felt like Montembeault was really solid and kind of gave them a chance to, was I think round about the midway point in the second, was he was still kind of keeping them alive, and then obviously the dam started to break, and at that point it was clear that it was not going to be enough. But I think that was more a product of the Canadiens just never got going offensively, never gave Columbus a real push, because otherwise I think in the first half of the game especially, I thought Montembeault was really sharp. I thought he made a number of key saves, and Columbus was coming at the Canadiens all night off the rush too. So I thought, it was kind of a weird game because, like you kind of said, he stopped a lot of glorious chances, and yet there were sometimes weird bounces that got by, and other ones, like the first Roslovic goal, where it's like you expect him to stop that one, but I think it's also a really tough, as you kind of noted, I think it's a really tough situation for a goaltender to be in when there's such a chaotic environment in front of you. And so, I mean, yeah, the 5-1 scoreline doesn't look pretty, but really he was the only reason they even had a chance in the first half of the game, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm with you there. And, you know, as much as the second Roslovic goal was, you know, it's a cross crease pass and like a tap in kind of thing, going off the shaft of his stick, 2 of the weirdest goals I've seen this season from a guy who, like, after the game, you look at the stat line and you're like, oh man, this guy must have been like hot tonight. And he had his chances, but it seemed like the touches that he had were not actually that great. They just happened to go in.
Yeah, it was a really interesting night for him because he's a guy that's been pretty good for Columbus this year. And I think him and Patrick Laine work really well together. And you've seen Patrick Laine kind of factor in on both of his goals, especially that second one where he just threw it at the net, doing what Patrick Laine does. Who, man, he just has these games every once in a while where you're like, man, if he could do this consistently, like Patrick Laine could be a real big star in this league. But it's been an up and down year for him. But yeah, it was a weird game. Montembeault, like Harman was saying, was really good in the first half, making a ton of really like 10 bell saves. And as you noted, Andrew, it was kind of goofy goals going in, a tip in from Cole Sillinger late in the game, and then it kind of went out from there, and it wasn't really Montreal in the game at all. Like I was saying to you before the stream, that it almost felt like the first Martin St. Louis game that I've watched with the Canadiens, where it felt like that early season Habs team. And I don't know if they're just kind of getting tired towards the end of the year or what it is, but yeah, it was a little bit of a depressing game from a Habs point of view.
Yeah, there was a few people that I was talking to recently. I actually recorded the Hockey Inside Out show this morning with Stu Cowan wasn't on it, but Dan Robertson, the voice of the Habs on the radio here, and I believe he also does some TSN games, and Rick Green, former Montreal Canadian, and Julian McKenzie, and they were kind of talking about that whole situation with the Canadiens and what's gone on, that they just don't seem to have that same pop that they had uh, once Martin St. Louis first took over. And part of that, I think, is just the loss of players to the trade deadline. They did lose a lot of depth, but at the same time, it's also the end of the season, and you can see guys kind of conserving, not wanting to go into the offseason injured, right? So I don't think there's anyone out there right now who's giving that like 110%, because what are they really fighting for?
Yeah, I think it's always an interesting time of year, especially because in Vancouver, I've kind of had that perspective for a while in a lot of the past rebuilding seasons. And you can tell that by the time it gets to around late March, early April, if you really have no chance, it can be tough to get up for those games. It's not that you lack effort. It's that extra desperation or that extra intensity sometimes, where when you have a motivating factor like the playoffs to play for, it can give you extra energy. It can give you extra life, because you think about the physical grind of an 82 game season and all the travel that comes with it, the bumps and bruises, and it just becomes such a mental slog too, especially as you kind of noted when you see so many pieces depart at the deadline, like Toffoli, of course, and Sherrod and Kulak. It's hard to kind of get up for the games the same way as you might have at the start of the season, especially because you mentioned that they had the coaching bump with Marty St. Louis. I think guys at that point are also really excited for something new and to make a first impression on a coach. But then again, those things can sometimes wear off too. And now when you only have, less than a dozen games or so left in the season, it can be a real mental battle. And that's where, Columbus is obviously kind of in a similar spot. And so, maybe it wasn't as big of a factor as it may have been against a different sort of team, but it just felt like Columbus was, especially early, I thought in the first period, just able to win every puck in the offensive zone. And
Yeah.
It just felt like the Canadiens were a little bit slow, half a step behind. And you could kind of see that they were just lacking jump, lacking some energy.
Yeah, and I think there's some times in an 82 game schedule where you just have a game like that. But I think because of the way that this team played the first 45 games of the year under Dominique Ducharme, when they do have a game like that under St. Louis, which they've had maybe 2 games like that, this one and against Carolina, whereas Carolina, I think, just played essentially a perfect game against Montreal and absolutely dominated the crap out of them. This was a game where if the Canadiens had that energy, they might have been able to turn things around on the Blue Jackets at least a little bit and made it close. But because of that first half of the season, everyone's like, oh God, here we go again. I understand that feeling, but it's an easy one to kind of write off and move on from. I will talk about 2 more things from this game, and then we're going to start talking about some prospects and going forward in the future and team building and all that stuff, because we've got Tony here to bring the prospect information. We've got Harman here to talk about rebuilding teams, because he's seeing the same thing or a similar thing happening in Vancouver with both teams gutting their front office, gutting their coaching staff. So it's interesting to see 2 Canadian teams on opposite sides of the end of the country here going through a similar situation. But before we go off the game, I got to say, Ryan Poehling had the play of the game for the Montreal Canadiens, and it wasn't his goal. It was that back check on the power play where Hoffman gave the puck away, which we're going to talk about Hoffman after that because it's the worst thing about the game. And just the way he chased it down, I was shocked that he was actually able to catch up to that play and kill it.
Yeah, it was interesting because I don't look at Poehling as a guy that has that burner speed that's really going to be able to do that and catch those plays consistently. But he made a really nice play on that play, and he made a couple other really nice defensive plays today. I thought his positioning was really good, and I don't think Poehling's ever going to be that guy that scored the 4 goals in that first game against Toronto ever again. But he's going to be a good, solid middle six center. I think he can play on that third line pretty consistently and bring that defensive element, and then chip in with a goal here and there, kind of in a big moment. And I feel like every time I'm praising Paling, and it's in a losing effort because there hasn't been a ton of winning this year. But yeah, like you said, going kind of even looking back at the team standings from where they're at now, like even where they're at now, like with the winning that they've done under St. Louis, they're still second last in the league, 1 point ahead of the Coyotes, 1 point behind Seattle, and then there's a 6 point gap between the next team. So even like you said, the motivation to not really get there isn't there, but Paling had a really good game, and you want to see that from guys like that. And Suzuki also chased down a play on the power play as well in a similar way. And you see guys like that putting in effort, and you want that from the rest of the team. But like you said, it just wasn't really there.
Yeah, it was not a great game for the power play. We'll say that, and not a great game for Mike Hoffman as well, because lately every single game I get texts and tweets at me all game long about every 5 to 10 minutes in real time of just like, why is this guy on the team? And I understand it because he's the only player I've ever seen who passes to nobody like 5-6 times a game. It's wild how much this guy does that. And I don't know what's wrong with him, because I know that he's a one-dimensional player. Like, everybody knows that. But in the past, he's brought that one dimension, and he just hasn't been able to do that this year. He's had like one little hot streak, and I know he got an assist on the goal tonight, a secondary assist, but that was just by virtue of playing on the point. I don't think Chris Weidman or anybody else would make a different play than just a little pass to Suzuki to start that up. I don't know what the Canadiens are going to do with this guy, because he's got 2 more years left. If he plays like this next year, I don't think there's any other option but to buy him out.
Yeah, and the thing with Hoffman too is it's not just that he's a one-dimensional player and that the only thing he really brings to the table is scoring, but where he really shines is the power play, right? And that's where he needs to deliver top-level value, because otherwise, even when you factor in his goal-scoring ability at 5-on-5 over the last few seasons, the defensive shortcomings outweigh the net positive that he delivers offensively. And so with Hoffman, I remember back in the day from the right circle, especially in Florida, he would be one of the most deadly accurate shooters from the right flank, and it was just automatic. And it's been interesting to see. I was surprised, because it's been a while since I've sort of seen him in a different power play setting, and he looked like a shadow of his former self. And in your head, it's interesting, because hypothetically going into this season might have thought, well, potentially Caulfield on one flank, Hoffman on the other. Like, you've got 2 potentially elite shooters right there. Now the other pieces, you might not have enough to have a real top end power play, but you figure that could at least be the backbone of, say, a league average man advantage unit. And yet that just hasn't come to fruition. So with Hoffman, I really think they need to figure out and rebuild his confidence on the man advantage, because he kind of is what he is at 5-on-5. He's going to be a defensive liability. He's going to turn the puck over. He's not a particularly intelligent player, either with or without the puck. He does one thing really well, and that's shoot it really hard and beat goaltenders consistently. And that really starts on the power plays. His value really lies on special teams. So that has to be the number one priority for the Canadiens in terms of restoring his value, is how do we get him back productive and confident on the power play.
Yeah, and I wonder if that's this, like, the worry that the Canadiens have in getting something for Hoffman is it worth it to put Hoffman in the ideal spot on the power play for him to build his value, when in order to do that, you're probably taking Caulfield out of that same spot, because they're both, I believe, right-handed shots, right? I believe Mike Hoffman is right-handed shot.
Oh, he is? I thought he might have been a lefty.
No, you're right. He shoots left. So I guess it's it's Suzuki.
That's what I was thinking. Like, you could have him on opposite. Of course, I think you'd be displacing Suzuki then.
Yeah, that's Suzuki, right?
Which is, it's a bit of a problem. But that's where Hoffman has typically been a really good shooter from, is that right flank. And on paper, it sounds promising. So, I guess it sort of depends on how the Canadiens power play goes over the balance of the season, and if you want to experiment or tinker.
Well,
Yeah,
they're
and I think
second last, so there's not much worse that they could do.
yeah, I think one thing I noticed today, especially with Hoffman, is they ask him to carry the puck a lot on the power play in
Yeah.
transition, whether it's up the ice, and he just doesn't have that skill in his repertoire. Like that's not his game. He needs to be off the puck in that situation and kind of already up ice, able to kind of walk into the zone and hide in the shadows a bit, creep into space, and then take advantage of that shot, like Harman was saying. Having him carry the puck, like there's, I think, 2 or 3 times where he just gave the puck away on a needless spin pass or something goofy that he was trying to do. And he's just not that guy on the power play. So get him in a position that's comfortable for him. Let him kind of stay in the weeds until he needs to pounce into space and then use that shot. But finding a spot for him on the power play is definitely going to be needed, because this is a guy that hasn't scored 30 in a few years now. And he's a guy that's what his calling card is, because he doesn't bring much else. So 11 goals on the year this year isn't really justifying that $4.5 million for the next couple of years too.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I feel like the Canadians put him up on that top spot because he's a guy that can score from distance, but you just have so much responsibility in distributing the puck at the top there. And this game, it's not an isolated thing, right? Like, it's so clear that he can't be trusted to distribute that puck consistently. It's even when he has time and space and the pass is relatively simple, he just manages to miss those like half width of the ice passes by like 5 feet and put guys in really treacherous situations in terms of their defensive positioning. And it just doesn't make sense. I love that St. Louis and his coaching staff are trying a 5-forward power play, but they just don't have the right players to make that 5-forward power play work. And that's the thing, is with where they are in the building process, which is the very beginning, that's fine. It's cool they're trying it. It's just not working.
Yeah, and like you kind of alluded to me, Hoffman's always been a catch and release shooter. Like that's his role. I would never want him handling the puck too much. I don't want the puck on his stick too long. He should just be stand and deliver and shoot, and kind of to borrow almost an NBA analogy, just be the guy in the corner 3 spot who just gets the ball, shoots it. That's all you want. And like you kind of mentioned, when you're at the top at that point, you've got to be able to walk the line. You've got to be able to make the right reads, make the right decisions. You've got to be a good passer, and you've got to really carry the puck a lot. And it's also, when you're the last man back there, if you turn the puck over, it's an odd man break going back the other way. So it's a really high leverage spot. And it's not even one that forwards are accustomed to playing. Like, when would Hoffman have ever had that sort of experience manning the point on the power play before in his career? He's in a completely foreign spot, playing, I think, to some of his weaknesses rather to his strengths. So you're right, it just definitely isn't working. Although, like you mentioned, I love that they are at least experimenting with different things. And I always love seeing, when you're at this point in the season and the games don't really matter, to try new things and to innovate, and maybe something clicks and you can apply to next season, something crazy that you might not want to try game one of a new season when it's a new chapter. But yeah, I think this is an experiment that isn't really working in its existing structure.
Yeah, and 100%. To that point though, I was going to say, we were talking about Suzuki being displaced from the wing. He's a guy that I think has that dynamic ability that can play up top a little bit. You look at him, and this is a weird comparison, but you almost envision him in a Quinn Hughes type role up top, where he's able to distribute and kind of push the puck to the sides, push the puck to the guys. And then when he gets that lane, he can move in and take the shot from there and hope for a deflection in front. You got crowd in front with the power play. So I think moving him to the point would be a good idea, because like you guys said, the 5-man power play is something fun to try, especially at this point.
Yeah, I think the main thing that they're worried about with Suzuki is he is the power play. Right?
Yeah.
The gap between him and the next best player on the Canadiens power play unit is I think 7 points, and that's Cole Caulfield, who's done almost all of that under St. Louis, because he just didn't get much power play time under Ducharme. And then after that, surprisingly, is Mike Hoffman, but I think a lot of that is secondary assists, so we'll have to look that up afterwards. But even like Chris Weidman, who's been the point man for most of the season, only has 11 power play points. Like, the power play just is not very good overall. All right, let's move on to some more fun topics, because that game was just not fun. Unless you're a Columbus Blue Jackets fan, in which case, welcome. We welcome you to the show. There's probably a couple of you at the very least, but your team did much better this in this one than we did, but we're not going to talk about them that much. I apologize for that. I did get a special request from a couple people on Twitter for Tony. Do you have any knowledge of the David Jiricek injury situation?
It's tough because he was named to the world championship roster, if I'm not mistaken, but his leg injury that he sustained earlier this year it was supposed to kind of keep him out the rest of the way, and maybe he kind of comes in towards the end of the year. The world championship was kind of like the hopeful end of things, so we'll have to see when the world championship rolls around. But if he's there, I think all he's going to do is boost his draft stock, because he's a guy that I think a lot of people were high on early in the year, and the injury hasn't really brought him down many boards because people haven't really been enthralled with a lot of other players in this draft class, especially defensemen. So he's still up high on a lot of the boards. So he's definitely a guy that's worth watching, especially if he does come back for that world championship.
Yeah, there was a lot of questions during this game that I was fielding from Canadiens fans about, like the future of this team. And they basically have two very clear holes organizationally, right? One of them is defensemen in general, like a top 4 defenseman. Caden Gooley is the only guy I think they have that projects comfortably within that top 4 range, right? Like, I think everybody's enjoyed what Jordan Harris has brought so far. I think he's actually been better than expected, honestly, after talking to a few people and kind of tempering expectations a little bit. Justin Barron, I think, has good potential, but you're hoping he can be a number 4, right? That's like his top ceiling. So there's guys like Jiricek to look at, and then the Canadiens need a 1-2 center to pair with Suzuki, because I think Christian Dvorak, whether he's a long-term fit or not, is most comfortable in a 3C role. Like if your 3C is Christian Dvorak and you've got two guys considerably better than Christian Dvorak, you're probably a pretty good team. That's not too bad. So the question that I got asked is, the Canadiens are second last in the league right now. First last. The last team in this draft has a very high chance of getting the first overall pick. If the Canadiens can't draft Shane Wright and Tony Ferrari is head of scouting for the Montreal Canadiens, do you try to address the center hole because it's harder to find that player, or do you look at the wealth of top-end defensemen available in this draft and go that way?
Well, I'll channel my inner bald man energy with the Kent Hughes situation they've got going on there. And no, I go center here, honestly, because not only is there a center worth taking here, but I think he's considerably better than any of the defensemen in this draft, and that's Logan Cooley if you can't get Shane Wright. I think Logan Cooley does a lot of things really, really well. He's a good two-way center. He's got a lot of the same aspects as Wright, but he does have a little bit of a flashier, higher end. Where you can kind of get some plays with Logan Cooley where you're like, oh, wow, like he just kind of dangled the dude. Whereas Shane Wright is more of that methodical, tactical, calculated player where he has the skill to do it. He just doesn't have to do it very often because he's always in the right position. So Logan Cooley's a pretty decent consolation prize in this year's draft if you're drafting second overall. And yeah, I do think he's better than any of the kind of defensemen up in the board, because the next defenseman I have on my board is David Jiricek, who we just kind of talked about, and he's coming off a pretty long injury, so you don't know exactly how badly that affected him. So with a big world championships, maybe he kind of gets into that conversation at number 2. But right now, for me, that top 2 is kind of pretty secure with Shane Wright and then Logan Cooley.
All right, we had dissenting opinions, I believe, from when we had Mitch Brown and David St. Louis on. I think they were both pretty high on Jiricek. I think St. Louis really likes the defensive D, not Marty, David St. Louis. So different St. Louis, we'll say there. Now, over to Harman a little bit. The Vancouver Canucks are in a somewhat similar position to the Montreal Canadiens, but I think they have more pieces of the contending team that they want to be signed up. Their biggest thing is probably, cap flexibility, right? What kind of challenges do you see them facing going forward, trying to build a contender versus what the Canadiens are facing?
Yeah, I think it's for the Canucks, it's one of figuring out what their timeline is. And that's at least one of the good things about the Canadiens is they are in a different spot where their timeline is pretty clear and there's a cohesion there. And I think what went wrong with the Canucks, which I think serves as a good cautionary tale for the Canadiens, is the Canucks they accelerated too quickly. And what I mean by that is they got their franchise center, Elias Pettersson. They got their number 1 defenseman in Quinn Hughes. And then they thought, great, we're ready to contend. Let's try and go all in to make the playoffs. And that's where you had moves like signing Tyler Myers. And that's where they sort of made these aggressive moves. Obviously, some of them worked out, like trading for JT Miller. But even then, Miller is a player who you look at now, and he may not fit with the Canucks' timeline because he's one hell of a player. He's been unbelievable for them, their best forward, but he's only got a year left on his contract, and then he's a UFA. The Canucks aren't going to be ready to contend by the time his contract expires. So now the Canucks, they either have to deal him or sign him at $8.5 or $1 million a year, or in that sort of range on a long-term extension, which just is a really tough decision to make. So when you look at the Canucks' situation, they, I think, even in off seasons past, went out and signed the likes of Beagle and Roussel, and they sort of made a lot of these moves where they mortgaged future cap flexibility and traded away draft picks in order to accelerate the process. And that's where now the Canucks are in a bit of a mushy middle, where they have a lot of their foundation is set, but they're still not nearly deep enough to be credible, to be a credible top 10 team. And that's where now the team might have to take a step back in order to take 2 steps forward when you look at decisions with guys like Miller, and looking at even, does a Brock Besser fit in the timeline? And so now when you look at the Canadiens, yeah, their path to contention is a lot longer, and they obviously have some problematic contracts on the books as well, but they at least have the advantage of almost a clean slate to work with, where you look at the number of draft picks that they have coming up in the next couple of years. They're going to be picking a lot in the top 3 rounds, which is something Vancouver didn't do. Even when they were rebuilding, they traded away more draft picks than they acquired. And so I think for Kent Hughes and the Canadiens, it's just, I think number one is just preaching patience, continuing to stockpile as many future assets as you can, and kind of understanding that this might be a painful process in the beginning, but then you look at what a team like Detroit has been able to benefit from, and yeah, they're still a long ways away from being a legit contender, but the Red Wings are at least starting to see some of the fruits of their labor. They've got 2 guys in Satter and Raymond that have immediately come onto the scene and been excellent pieces, and we all can kind of look at Detroit and say they're not there yet, but they've got a really exciting future. They've got cornerstone pieces everywhere. And I think that just kind of has to be the priority for Montreal is you have to focus on drafting and developing. And once you sign those cornerstone pieces, you have to kind of be honest with yourself about when is the appropriate time to push your chips in, because I think that's a mistake Vancouver made. And with Montreal, I think the biggest question I just have is with respect to, and I know it doesn't necessarily affect the rebuild in the long run a ton, but looking at the futures for the likes of Carey Price or Brendan Gallagher, and the Canadiens have a lot of money tied up long term, and so that's perhaps a bit of a complicating factor as they try and rebuild. But I think in bringing in the pieces or in the future assets that they've brought in, especially at the deadline, I think they've at least got a good start on it.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you brought this up, because Kent Hughes and Jeff Gorton have both kind of hinted that they would be active in the free agent market this summer. And I think a lot of people see that as, the possibility that they're going to make a big splash signing and try to accelerate this rebuild in the same way that Vancouver did. I'm wondering if it's more along the lines of signing players as stopgap measures, right? I look at a guy like Vincent Trocheck in Carolina, who's a UFA and will not have a home there because he's going to demand more money. Signing a guy like that for like 2 years at a ton of money because you're going to have a ton of cap space would probably make him happy because he's raking in the cash, and give him a place to basically earn another big contract if he's not offered a long-term contract somewhere. There's that kind of situation that could develop, but there's definitely a possibility, because of Carey Price's stature in this market, that when he comes back this year, because his wife kind of spilled the beans on her little newsletter that she does that went around social media today, that he will be playing games this year. It sounds like it's going to be very soon, and the Canadiens did just clear enough cap space to activate him off of LTIR this afternoon, I believe. So my theory is that happens this weekend on Saturday because it's the last Saturday home game of the season, and we all know that Carey Price is Mr. Saturday Night, but that's purely speculation on my part. I have no insider information whatsoever, but because of Carey Price's stature in this market, there might be pressure to be competitive while he's still around, and I think that's something that this management group is going to have to prove that they don't need to do that, right? Like, there seems to be a plan that's relatively clear based on the trades they made this year, that they acquired players in the 2021 age range along with high-end draft picks. So you're looking at like maybe a 2-year window where players start trickling into the NHL, and some make it, some don't. And then 4 or 5 years from now, players that you drafted and developed yourself start making it into the NHL. So if the plan is to be, let's say, a fringe playoff team and start getting your feet wet in the playoffs 2 years from now, but not going all in, I think everyone would be relatively okay with that as long as they get a high-end draft pick next year. But if it's to go all in 2 years from now, it would kind of kill all the hope that this new regime has generated for themselves in this honeymoon period.
Yeah, and I think that we've seen so much hope, like you mentioned. I think the deadline, everyone was pretty complimentary of Kent Hughes' work. I think, like you mentioned, he got these young player with a prospect, and oftentimes just a couple of little pieces here and there. So he's doing a lot of that work that Harman said, where he's stockpiling draft picks. Looking at their draft picks this year, they've got so many going up, like 2 in the first, 2 in the second, 3 in the third, 3 in the fourth. Next year, they've got a couple again. Like you're seeing them build up that stockpile of draft picks, doing that and hoping that you can kind of do those stopgap players. Like you said, maybe they're a fringe playoff team next year. Maybe they're kind of flipping up in that 5th spot in the division, almost challenging, but not really ever getting there. But I really hope they don't kind of rush things the way kind of Vancouver did. The way, like Harman said, accelerating the rebuild, kind of getting ahead of yourselves, especially I thought with Vancouver when they had that play in the bubble, where they had that series where they won, they beat Vegas. Everyone was super pumped about this team. And then there was some kind of weird moves in the offseason, and just kind of everything kind of collapsed in on itself from there. So Montreal avoiding that's going to be a big deal for them. And like you said, Andrew, like maybe the activity in free agencies, the Toronto style, and I know Montreal fans are going to love hearing that, but getting the Andre Kashas, getting the Michael Bunting, someone that is somewhat young, someone in their mid-20s that you can kind of grab. And I mean, maybe if you get Michael Bunting, you get a Rookie of the Year candidate as a 26-year-old. So it's those kind of moves that I kind of see Kent Hughes doing in the offseason. I really certainly hope, unless he's going for Patrice Bergeron or something ridiculous like some of the conspiracy theory people like want to talk about on Twitter, you don't go big game hunting this summer.
Yeah, I'm the one who started the Patrice Bergeron.
Yeah, I know.
Which is completely fabricated. Well, not the fact that Kent Hughes was his agent, but I don't think Patrice Bergeron would actually be interested in going to a rebuilding team.
No.
If Patrice Bergeron had started to fall off, maybe, but the fact is this year, he's still posting friggin' bonkers defensive numbers, and the offense is still there for him. He is something else. Like, it's such a shame that he's been a Bruin his whole career, because I want to like him so much more than I do. Sarah Y mentioned that George Larocque mentioned that the plan is for Price to play on Friday. Now, Larocque sometimes has some insider information from the Canadiens and sometimes has a tendency to make things up. So we'll see if he's right. I know mine is just speculation, but we'll see. What else was I going to say? The Vancouver Canucks, I mean, obviously they're going to have to shed some salary heading into next season. The Canadiens are going to have to do so as well. But like Harman said, it seems like the Canadiens are in a little bit of a more relaxed situation, whereas the Canucks kind of have to start to compete right away, both to satisfy Elias Pettersson on that short-term deal and also make hay while their young stars are in their prime years. But I have to say, I really like the Canucks forward group. Like, I really, really like it. When I heard that there was a possibility they might move Connor Garland, I was a little bit flabbergasted because I feel like he's on a sweetheart deal as well. But I think Harman's right that they might have to take a step back to take a step forward or 2 steps forward in the next couple of seasons.
Yeah, I think their back end just isn't good enough. They don't have anything beyond Quinn Hughes. Obviously, Oliver Ekman-Larsson has had a solid bounce back season, but he's also making 7.25 million forever, and he's around 30 years old. So that's a ticking time bomb in terms of the contract there. And they back end just isn't good enough, and because of Miller, you look at this core group offensively, right? You've got Miller, his contract expires. He's a UFA at the end of next season. Horvat's a UFA at the end of next season. Besser's an RFA at the end of this season with a $7.5 million qualifying offer. The challenge here is that Vancouver's forward group is also at the top end becoming significantly more expensive. And so that's a big sort of issue that the club has to deal with. And the problem is just that they don't have flexibility to improve, right? Because you look at the Canucks on paper right now, and you can see a team that is middling on paper, and you can sort of convince yourself that, all right, like if we just add a few pieces here and there, that maybe we can be really good. And the problem is just that they have no cap flexibility. There's nothing coming in the prospect pipeline, and they have no draft picks that they can trade away because they haven't drafted. They haven't had a first round pick in 2 years. So for that reason, they've got nothing to help them improve. Is the point? They're a team that lacks flexibility. They're rigid. They're stuck where they are unless they take a step back. And that's why I'm so, when I look at Montreal's situation, and I understand it, given Carey Price's everything he's done for this franchise, everything he's done for the city. But I think it would be a mistake if you get ahead of yourselves and start accelerating things in a couple of years, especially because, look, I love Cole Caulfield. I love Nick Suzuki. But if I'm being totally honest with you guys, I think to win a Stanley Cup, you're going to need forwards better than Nick Suzuki and Cole Caulfield. Like I don't think you're going to win a Stanley Cup with Nick Suzuki as your best forward, let's say. And I really can't overstate how much I love Nick Suzuki, how complete his game is, how smart he is, how intelligent. And I think there's more to unlock in his game, but they haven't found their superstar yet. And whether it's up front, whether it's on the back end, and so to me, they just lack those franchise pieces. Like even the Canucks, yeah, Elias Pettersson has had a down season, but you have at least a defenseman in Quinn Hughes, who is one of the best in the game. Thatcher Demko is one of the best young goalies in the NHL, and he's on a sweetheart deal. There, at least in that situation, you have some of your cornerstone pieces, and I feel like there aren't enough of those cornerstone pieces to where there's a lot of work to be done with Montreal. Where again, if they stick to the process, if they draft well with the abundance of picks they have, they'll be fine. If they stay, if they're committed to the process. I mean, again, I bring up the Detroit example. They had nothing, and now look at the superstar pieces that they have. So if you stick with it, if you're patient, you are going to be able to turn it around. And I should also note, I'm a big fan of Kent Hughes and Jeff Gordon and just their overall thought process and everything I've heard from them so far. But they've got to stick to the plan. They can't veer off of it and do what Vancouver did.
Yeah, and I think one thing I wanted to note too on that Detroit example is when you watch Detroit a few years back, when they really kind of started missing the playoffs and going into a little bit of a rebuild when Ken Holland was there, they looked at guys like Dylan Larkin and Anthony Mantha and guys like that, and they were like, these can be our guys moving forward, but they weren't really able to be those high-end guys. So I think now that Detroit's got a guy like Moritz Seider coming in, who looks like a true superstar, a guy like Lucas Raymond, looks like he could be a star winger, and they've got guys like Edvinsson on the way. I think now they're getting out of that stage that Montreal's kind of at right now. I think Montreal, if they look at their roster and go, well, we just got to wait for Caulfield to develop a little bit more, we got to wait for Suzuki to develop a little bit more, you'll have really good players, but you don't have that great player like Harman was saying. I think that's the thing that some teams kind of fool themselves into thinking, that some of the players that just because they're top prospects doesn't mean they're necessarily going to be the star player on that team.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like that's kind of the crossroads that the Canadiens are at right now. Do they try to swing big on getting like a superstar to be the guy ahead of Suzuki, or do they try to get a guy who's say like as good as Suzuki, but maybe costs less. And then they build out like, do they want a first, second, third line or 3 second lines? Because that's something that most teams haven't been able to accomplish very well, especially in the cap era, right? Is you end up overpaying your guys for being the top guy on your team as opposed to, are they really a top guy? And I know a lot of people were upset with how much Suzuki got in the offseason, but like, frankly, he got second line center money. That's what that is, you know, especially in today's game. And I feel like the Canadiens are actually going to be pretty benefited by the fact that he was signed during a flat cap situation, because when escrow kind of relaxes a little bit and the cap starts going up a little bit after we get further away from the pandemic, salaries are going to go up. We saw it before this with Austin Matthews, Mitch Marner, all those guys who signed for big deals. Not that Suzuki's comparable to Austin Matthews, but those salaries are going to keep going up, especially for the top end players. I think before the cap started to go flat, we started to see a more natural progression of the superstars being paid superstar money, as opposed to when the cap first came in, there was a very like a leveling of the playing field where a $7 million player was the most you could get, but there were fourth liners that could make like $3 million, you know, and that never really made sense from a market efficiency standpoint. So I wonder if the Canadiens are going to be very benefited from Suzuki getting that contract now. Before we go any further with the Canadiens, so there was a question for Tony saying, do you think that Cooley is comfortably better than Nazar, saying that they think it's more of a toss-up? And let's throw Matt Savoy in there as well, because I've heard a lot about Matt Savoy.
So with those three players, the first one I'll go with is Savoy, because I think he has the highest upside out of all of them, because his skill level is just unreal. Some of the things he can do with the puck and in space is really special, but he's a 5'9" center. And I think he does work best as a center because he does flourish when he has that space, when he has that ability to distribute to both sides and really be a difference maker that way. But I have a feeling he's going to end up being pushed to the wing in the NHL, which kind of could diminish some of his impact. I think he doesn't work as well off the boards. But if this kid can be that Braden Point-esque center that I think he can be, I think he could be, like I said, Braden Point, basically, right? Like that's a great player that you'd love to have. And then with Logan Cooley and Frank Nazar, I think they're two sides of a coin. I think with Nazar, you have all this flash skill, the dash and the cut to the middle. And he does so many of these things at a high pace, high speed, but it's not always as consistent. Whereas Cooley, I think, has that more well-rounded game. His defensive game has a little bit more purpose to it. It's not that Nazar doesn't have effort on the back end, because I do think he's a guy that has effort in all three zones, and in transition, especially, I think he's really, really good. But he doesn't quite know exactly what to do defensively right now. And he, in the offensive zone, it's a little bit of the same thing. There's a little bit of, I called it controlled chaos earlier in the year, but it really is just a lot of chaos sometimes, but it's productive chaos. He's always generating chances. He's developing chances for his teammates and line mates. So I think he has the higher upside of the two, but I do think there's a little bit lower of a floor with him. So for me, I have them both in my top 10, but Cooley is kind of my clear cut number 2 right now, just because his game is more well-rounded. He's a bit more projectable, and he does have some of that flash and flair that a guy like Shane Wright doesn't necessarily bring to the game every single time.
Great answer. All right. Last question for you both, and then we'll close this out, because I don't know about you guys, but I'm tired and a little bit under the weather. I slept weird last night, and now I can't look up very well, because, you know, when you get old, that's all it takes. But last question is, who is your pick for the Calder Trophy? Because this is the talk of Twitter lately. And why is it not Michael Bunting?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it's got it for me. It's Moritz Seider. I think just watching him play, I have a whole different appreciation level that I don't think the numbers really do justice. Just in terms of the point totals or even the underlying numbers. Frankly, it's just when you watch him play, he's almost able to single-handedly impact the flow of a game, whether it's the way he's able to, for a big man, the way he skates and the way he stick handles through traffic and beats forecheckers. It's really, really special to watch it. And Bunting, don't get me wrong, he's a phenomenal player, but he's also had the benefit of playing alongside Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner for most of the season. So, I mean, I had Bunting as one of my breakout players, so I love him in terms of at the start of the season. I thought he was going to pop, But I just feel like Seider, especially without accomplishing all of this without a high-end partner and not a lot of help around him, the all-around impact that he has, he's such a special player to watch for me. And so for me, I still kind of lean towards Seider.
Yeah, as a Leafs fan, I am completely in agreement with you. Honestly, like Seider is the guy for me, 100%. He's been the guy for me for a few years now. I was really high on him his draft year. Some said it unreasonably high. But he's a guy that there was so much to his game over in Germany that was not being seen, because he was told during his draft year when he played in a pro league in Germany, he was like, they were like, play defense. You don't need to worry about the offensive game. You're an 17-year-old defenseman in this league, be 6'4" and play defense. So he really committed to that and developed this outstanding defensive game that we're seeing so nuanced and so many little tiny details that he pulls off in the league that you're looking at him and going, man, that's a 10-year veteran move. That's not something a rookie is doing. And that's the kind of stuff Seider does. And then he's fourth in rookie scoring with 46 points. He's going to probably be a 50-point defenseman playing with largely Danny DeKaiser and I can't even remember his first name.
Mark
Osterley.
Stahl.
Mark Stahl's been there. Osterley's been there. Like, it's like no one knew who Osterley was before this season. I barely knew who he was. Like, and he's playing big minutes with Moritz Seider because Moritz Seider's capable of that. So for me, this guy's the clear-cut rookie of the year winner. Bunting's cool. He's fun. He's 45 years old too. So, and I know like he's technically a rookie, yes, but I think you do have to at least factor in the fact that he is 26. He scored his first NHL goal in 2018. Like that feels like that should disqualify him in my opinion, but whatever. Like he should be on the finalist ballot, but yeah, Seider's the guy.
Yeah, and I will echo you both, honestly. And, you know, it's cheating at this point to go third and agree, but Moritz Seider is just incredible. You watch him control games. He plays over 23 minutes a night as a rookie on a team without much there for a defenseman, frankly. He's just incredible. Watch Moritz Seider reverse hit someone and tell me he's not rookie of the year. You know, it's like shades of Peter Forsberg, except for on defense. And I remember when he was drafted, I was thinking that Yzerman kind of went off his rocker a little bit because I thought it was like a huge reach, but I'm not a prospect guy, and clearly I was wrong. And it looked like he was like, the first thing I'm going to get for this team that I just took over is Victor Hedman, right? Victor Hedman position for the Detroit Red Wings going forward. And he just knocked it out of the park. I mean, obviously the scouts for Detroit as well. It wasn't all just Yzerman, but the GMs always get the end credit. And I'm with you guys. I love Michael Bunting. I think he's a fantastic hockey player. But at the end of the day, for me, he's a complimentary player on an elite NHL line. And I'm not trying to take away from him, but he's not doing that on his own. I do think he makes Matthews and Marner both better, but that's what a great complimentary player does. And it would be weird, I think, to give the Calder to a complimentary player as opposed to a Lucas Raymond who's doing it on his own, you know, putting up almost as much production as Bunting has. Trevor Zegras put up just as much production as Michael Bunting has. Now, Bunting has the underlying numbers, but playing with Austin Matthews. Like, of course he has the underlying numbers.
Yeah, all right. It's so weird. He's been such a great complimentary player, like you said, but you do look at the rest of the rookies in the league and you're like, Zegras has been this impact player that's putting up highlight reels all the time. Lucas Raymond has been on a tear this year, scoring more than anybody expected. And Moritz Seider's a number one defenseman on a team that's built of number 7 defensemen. So I don't even care. Red Wings fans love me enough, I can say that. But no,
I think they know, right?
Yeah,
I think they know.
And Red Wings fans are very self-aware of like the fact that they have 3 AHL defensemen on their roster at all times.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, thank you both so much for coming on the show tonight. You made a terrible game to watch a fun show to do. So first, Tony, and then Harman, tell everybody where they can find your work.
You can find all my work on the Hockey News. I've been doing a lot of work on a lot of the college kids signing, like Matthew Beniers and Ken Johnson, who we got to see a little bit tonight. So you can find all my work there and find me on Twitter at @TheTonyFerrari.
Yeah, you guys can find my work at The Athletic and on Twitter, obviously, at Harman Dayal too.
Excellent. Thanks everybody for tuning in after such a crappy game. I appreciate it so much. There's only 8 games left in this season, and soon we'll be launching Game Over Toronto and Calgary and Edmonton for sure. We're going through the audition tapes right now at SDPN. We have a meeting scheduled for Monday evening. We're going to have some big announcements coming up soon, so stay tuned. And we'll see you again on Friday for maybe Carey Price's first game in 11 months. That's exciting.
Oh,
There's
should be a
something to
good
look
one.
forward to still in this season. That's fun.